So, hi Mags, it's great to have you with us on the show today.
Hi, I'm
Now,
so glad to be here.
I'm really excited to speak with you because you're all about making authentic connections, storytelling, really building that your audience the right way, which I love, and I think that's something that everybody wants, but people aren't always necessarily sure how to achieve. But also we have a real common cause because I have the Driven Female Entrepreneur podcast and you have the Female Entrepreneur magazine, where you're really, again, helping, giving women a voice, showcasing female business owners, but also sharing valuable content that helps their business grow. So I'm really excited to dig into all of that. But before we do, I would love to know, how did you come to have this business?
Well, this business I started on the 20th of February of 2020, which was a great time to start a new business. But I've been an entrepreneur for longer than that. I first started working for myself in 2013 when I co-founded a platform that was all about overcoming emotional abuse, which really grew from my own experiences, from my own childhood. And so in that business, it was completely centered around my own experiences and of course those of the other people who co-founded it with me. But it was very much about us sharing our story and sharing our experiences. And as we were sort of healing and dealing with all the things that you deal with when you come out of these situations, um, we were sharing all of that with our community, and in an effort to try and help other people not have to sort of reinvent the wheel all the time. um, that particular project lost its funding in towards the end of 2019, and so that was a time for me to really consider, okay, so what is it that I'm going to do. I'd been doing the sort of online marketing stuff for that organization and some other people as well. And I realized that one of the questions that people asked me most was, how do you do it? How do you share so vulnerably, so openly about your journey and the not so nice aspects of what's going on, the harder aspects of it as well. And so I thought, well, um, why not help people do exactly that? Because I think many of us entrepreneurs, and especially women, we begin our business or we start our business from a place of something that we've experienced ourselves, whether it's a problem that we've overcome or a challenge that we faced. Um, and it's these stories that create the connection to the people that we want to work with, right? If you're going to work with someone, you want to have this idea that they're going to understand what it is that you're going through. Um, and but at the same time, telling those stories can feel really vulnerable and a bit scary. And it's that the dual feeling of, what if nobody reads this, and what if people read this? Which we're all going through. So if that's how people are feeling about sharing their story, that's totally fine. But it's such an important aspect of how we can create that sort of human connection with people that might want to work with us. And I know from my experience, the business coaches that I've worked with in the past as well have similar experiences to mine. And the only reason why I didn't even necessarily go like, oh, let me find a business coach that has this background, but you just resonate with someone. And what it does for me is when I sort of go down a particular rabbit hole, they recognize it much faster because they've been down that rabbit hole themselves. And so they pull me right back out of that. And it's a really helpful way to create a connection, because the people who resonate with your story often make it's just easier to work with people. It's more fun to work with people that you resonate with as well. We all like fun clients, right?
Yeah, exactly. I know I'm a TEDx speaker coach for Lausanne and Swansea events. And there, of course, when you're giving a key speech like that, you need to share a bit of your story. Like, why is this important to you? Why do you care? But yeah, I see them, they really struggle with, oh, but who really is interested in my story? But what I always tell them, and I'd be interested to hear your take on this, is that
Mm-hmm.
it's not your story, it's their story. You're gonna tell them something that's going to make them feel, oh, I'm not alone, I'm not a weirdo, I'm not stupid for experiencing this. Other people are in the same situation, and they can start to pick
Yes.
up those clues as to where they can go next. And sometimes, even if it is just that sense of I'm not alone, that's already a huge piece of value you've given people. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that was exactly that was the whole driver behind the organization, the platform that we'd set up. You're not alone in this, because we're so used to talking about our successes in our lives in terms of I mean, it's more fun as well to talk about things that we've achieved, and not dive too much into where we've come from, maybe. Um, but often, and so often when we then when we're in the middle of it, when we're in the midst of it, we're like, oh, look at all these people who are succeeding. Why can't I do it? I mean, the entrepreneurial world is full of that, right? When you look at marketing six figures this or seven figures that, it's often this sort of unattainable thing, because or it feels like that, because we're in the middle of, oh, but I don't know how to organize my marketing and who's going to write my captions, and we're not in that space. And so hearing that even the people who we now look up to as as being leaders and change makers, if we can hear that they've too been in these places, in these in this sort of mental space that we're in, it just gives you that, oh, so I can get through this to the other side of this. It really is, it creates that connection of, oh, they can do it, then I can do it as well.
Yeah, and that's a big driver behind this podcast, in fact, is because you only see people once they're successful. Then you start to see, oh, and they're producing this content, they're here, they're there, but you haven't seen that's gone on before that, or how long it's taken them to get there. So with this podcast, we kind of draw that curtain back and show people a little bit of that. But I love that you started one business and then you pivoted that, but taking the lessons, that the biggest lessons you had from that experience. So although it was a completely different business, it was really sharing a lot of value. But did it feel like a natural transition for you, or was it a bit scary, or how did that feel?
I mean, terrifying. I mean, I think that is a little bit part of the entrepreneurial journey, though. Sometimes that you just kind of have to jump in and build your wings on the way down, right? But it was strange, because I'd been running that organization for maths 5.5, 6 years almost. And so it's almost like it's like a breakup. But at the same time, what I realized is that I am not put on this earth to work with people to really work through their trauma. Which, I mean, huge respect for anyone who is put on the earth for that, because it's hard work. So for me, looking back now, like at the time, it was strange and it was kind of upsetting. But looking back at it now, it's like, no, it's definitely the right move, because this is the aspect of that job that I liked, and not so much the supporting people through their trauma part of it. And that was, I mean, clearly part of what we were trying to do. So I think sometimes when we get to these sort of what shall we call them, surprises in our entrepreneurial journey, it's yeah, often they are just redirections to something that will work better for you. And I think, I mean, always take the lessons learned forward. Um, that's the whole. There's no such thing as failure so long as you can learn from what's not working, and whether that's okay. This system did not work for me, or this business is not working for me, or even being in business isn't working for me, which, is also sometimes something that's really difficult for people to acknowledge if they get to that. Entrepreneurship isn't for everyone, and that's also fine.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But you just have to jump in, I think. And I sometimes believe that if you studied entrepreneurship for 20 years and then started a business, you'd realize, oh, actually, I needed to know all of this. Until you actually get stuck in, it's hard to know what you need to know. And every business is quite different. The way you want to uh, sort of present your skills and talents through your business and make that available for people is different. So, there's a lot of merit for just getting stuck in, but then that does mean that your business is going to evolve as you grow, as your audience grows, as you learn more about how you can really add value to the world in a way that's meaningful for you and creates results for other people as well. So it's just this amazing journey that you never know where it's going to take you next, which is part of the
Exactly.
excitement, but you have to be ready for that.
It can also sometimes be a little bit terrifying.
Yeah, quite often.
Yes. But I always call those kind of moments in life, it's terrifying euphoria, because it's also really, that's also what makes it so exciting. I guess entrepreneurship is like the main adrenaline junkie um sport in the work in work life. It's the extreme skiing or whatever people do to, except, career wise.
Yeah. So in those moments where you are about to do something very brave, a little bit terrifying, what helps you through that?
Always community. I think, and this is something that just sort of bleeds through my business anyway, is that sort of collab collaborative aspect of what we're trying to build. I think um, there are many things that there are many issues I take with hustle culture, but one of them is that we are always having to be in competition with everybody else,
Mm.
which I just don't believe is true. I think we need to be connected to other people, uh, to cheer us on when it's scary, but also I firmly believe you cannot create in a vacuum. You need input from other people, and being connected to other entrepreneurs is so important, because they get that moment where you're scared but you're going to do it anyway. um, and um, and so, yeah, definitely reaching out to befriended um, entrepreneurs, but also just um, creating that community around you, to say like, oh, we're going to do something new and exciting. um, it's so important that you have that sort of, those people that you resonate with. And again, that's something that you create through making real connections with someone. And I think that when we take out, so I don't know, this discussion happened earlier today and it just popped back into my head, but we were actually talking about sales, and how, and I think many women feel a little bit icky about selling things to other people. Um, and but the remarks that we were making as well were like, but if you're looking at your sales call or at your follow up with your leads as just you building a relationship with a person, then suddenly it's not icky anymore, right? They can't, like, it's fine. Like, don't send them a copy paste message without ever having said hello before. That feels icky, and that's because when it happens to us, we don't appreciate, or at least I don't necessarily appreciate it, when people just out of nowhere start stalking me on Facebook. um, Whether that's, business proposals or marriage proposals, neither work. But it's about if we can just create connections with people, it makes us feel much safer anyway, because suddenly we're part of something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wrote the Shy Girl's Guide to Networking, and I chose networking as the first subject. So it's going to be a series of books to cover, because I think it's really such a powerful tool, particularly for women in business, and particularly if you feel shy, not in the sense that maybe feeling shy personally, but you're holding back from like going out and talking about your products, or having those sales conversations, or charging your worth. How do you overcome those? And that community is so powerful, having that, I call it the success circle, the kind of inner sanctum of your network, who are always there for you, just to pick up the pieces, to celebrate with you, to kind of bounce ideas around. It's really, really important. And I think even more so for women, having that community and that ability to contribute is really, really key.
In fact, I think I can't. I'm not good with numbers, so I'm not even going to try and remember the percentages. But one of the main reasons that female entrepreneurs are more likely to quit their business is because they don't feel like they have mentors or peer support. So creating these spaces for women to be able to talk about their business and feel supported in their business is extra important, because if we're, and I mean, this is just, now we're getting to the inner feminist part of it, but if we want women to have an equal share in this world, then we need more women to have their own businesses and to be successful in those businesses, and have the cash flow that comes with successful businesses, so that they can then invest in, by hiring other women to work in their businesses, and it becomes a kind of trickle effect. And I think when you look at how women spend, now I'm just getting really into the nerdy part of this, but when you look at how women spend their money, they are more likely to spend their money on things that improve the world in other ways as well. They are more likely to give to charity, but they're also more likely, for example, to extra cash flow maybe means that suddenly they can start buying organic vegetables for their family, or whereas men, and I'm generalizing, so I'm really sorry guys, but
There's no guys listening, don't worry.
okay, that's um but are more likely to spend on things like, oh, an extra or a larger car, or we women generally have different priorities with how they want to spend the money that they're making. And so I think it really is a way, supporting women in business is really a way to create substantial change in the world and giving more women financial freedom. I mean, I clearly come from a background of working with women who come out of domestic violence situations as well. Like, having financial freedom gives people so much better opportunities to leave those kind of situations. The number of people that I've spoken to over the years who can't leave because of finances is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Absolutely heartbreaking.
I love everything about what you just said, but I want to come back to this idea of storytelling. So
Yes.
it was something that you did a lot in your first business. How did you know, how did you get comfortable with the idea of sharing your story? Because you did have a very emotional and very personal story.
Um, I was kind of thrown into it a little bit. um, I, when I first said yes to doing it, I was going to be the behind the scenes person, and then things changed, and so I stepped up and became more of a in front of the scenes person as well as the behind the scenes person. Um, it's a I mean, by the time that happened, I'd been writing about my own experiences for a while, but in more a certain sort of more in forum and and discussion setting, so in a more private sense. I started just writing under a pen name, to be really honest. Took me a good few years to feel confident enough to say, like, actually, this is my story, and this is the person I am. But and what I learned around that as well is that it, and this is really complicated, I guess, because um, the, there's always other people involved in our stories, and especially when we're telling stories where other people may not come off as super nice people, it's really tricky because you don't, well, a lot of us don't want to create more problems or more tension or get other people into trouble, right? And so um I always I always talk to people about, when you're telling this story, tell it from your perspective. That's the main thing. So rather than saying this person did this to me, you can say this person did this and this is what it did to me, or this is how it made me feel, or this is how it affected me. And it kind of takes it out of that sort of pointing fingers and blaming people for stuff territory.
Mm.
Um, but that takes a little bit of practice. And also, I always say, like, especially those kind of stories, don't tell those stories. The internet's not your journal. Work through them before you start sharing things publicly, so that you can take the sting out of it. All the more private early writing, and even some of the public, when I read back now, it's like, well, I was still quite angry back then. And we change. Obviously, we change how we feel about certain events in our lives. But yeah, definitely, if you're going to start sharing personal stories, then process them first. And I often say, even if you want, let's say something happens to you on your way to the supermarket, and and you feel like it's relevant to your audience. I always say, like, write it today, write it from that emotion when you're still feeling it, and then leave it for at least 2 weeks. Then edit it and then share it, so that you have a little bit of time to process some of the emotions, so that you can deal with people commenting and responding, and you can get back to them in a better way. Most people will respond super positively, but what if someone doesn't, and you're still really raw in that emotion? That's just going to make it worse, right?
Mm.
Whereas if you've had a little bit of time to maybe process that story and let it calm down a little bit in your system, it doesn't affect you quite as dramatically. Unfortunately, there's just some really rude people on the internet who think they can just get away with just about anything. And what I say to that is delete, block, done.
Yeah, amazing advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. And when it comes to storytelling, so we've heard that it can really help in an emotional sense, so people don't feel alone. They don't feel that there's anything wrong with them for experiencing the trauma that they've had. But how can storytelling show up and benefit you in a business context?
Well, like I said, it's all about creating that human connection with your potential audience. And I think there's so much noise and so much overwhelm in our sort of, the social media online sort of sphere, where we do a lot of our marketing activity, um, and being able to create quality connections over quantity connections, I usually say, it feels, to me, usually it feels more authentic, it feels more aligned, it feels like I'm not sleazy, because I'm just showing up as me. This is my story, and and this is the person that I am. And I think when we kind of allow ourselves to drop that mask, we find the people that we want to work with. This idea that, of course, we always filter ourselves a little bit. I'm not the exact same person or I don't speak in the exact same way when I'm talking to a client or when I'm talking to a friend. Mostly I swear more when I talk to my friends. But um but it's not like who I am showing up in my marketing or in this podcast is substantially different from how I would show up to people who are my clients. Because it would be such a shocker if suddenly, they've signed up to a program with me and suddenly I'm a completely different person. So, especially because as entrepreneurs and as small business owners, we do a lot of the actual work ourselves. So let people get to know you. You're going to be that person. We were saying before we started recording, we're one person. And when we start changing things in our business, suddenly things start shifting in our personal life. And when we change stuff in our personal life, suddenly things start shifting in our business as well. And it's just because all of it is connected. We're one person. You can't completely separate who you are when you're working or when you're walking the dog or
Yeah.
some such thing.
We have this idea with this like concept of work-life balance that is we're either doing one or the other, but certainly in my case it's complete work-life blend. Everything kind of merges
Yes.
together. It's I do have boundaries around certain amounts of time, but there are certain things that have to be a bit fluid. But yeah.
Well, but also I generally have my best business ideas while I'm out walking the dog. And
Mm,
that is definitely not work time, but it's when my brain shuts down enough that I can have that sort of inspired thought of, oh, that's what I should do.
yeah.
And then, I record it on my phone and then I can forget about it again.
Mhm.
Um, but it's not like we stop having business thoughts or ideas or inspiration just because we've decided that this is our time off, and vice versa. um we are um, and I think everybody in the world has experienced this to some degree, having to suddenly work from home, is that, yeah, we have a personal life and it bleeds into our work life. And that's not really a problem. We just have to roll with it. I was in a sales call some point this year, and a bird flew into my house, which is upsetting in and of itself. But also, I have a cat who then went to hunt for the bird successfully. And so, in the middle of a sales call, I just had to say, "Okay, I'm going to have to deal with this. I'll be right back." But it's also the most hilarious thing that could have happened, probably during a
The whole
sales
story in
call.
itself.
Exactly, but it just shows that life happens while we're having a business, and that's just how it is. Um, and the smaller the business, the greater that effect. But it also the same is true for employees in big corporations as well. Obviously, we can't expect people to just switch off what's going on at home just because they happen to be clocked into the work.
Yeah.
If we're going through it at home, we're going to be distracted at work as well. It's unavoidable.
Yeah. So on the start side of stories, so if you want to share a story, what do you do or what do you share if you didn't lose it all, ended up sleeping on a friend's sofa for a few months and then wake up a millionaire?
What do I share if that's not my story?
Yeah, because those seem to be these rag to riches story are everywhere on social media. And I was like, well, I didn't sleep on my friend's couch, so what's my story? I,
Here's the
I'm just quite normal.
so so we're publishing a book next month, called The Power of Reinvention, which has different authors have contributed their stories in different chapters. And one of the chapters is someone who had a corporate job, had a burnout, which again is a fairly familiar story, but that story often ends with, and then started their own business. And she decided that she didn't want to start her own business because she quite liked her corporate job. She just had to find a way to make her job and how she showed up for her job work for her. Right. So there's always a story, because we don't have to We don't have to completely change everything about ourselves in order to have a form or to experience transformation. Um, the the platform that I ran was called Swan Waters, and the theming around it was very much based on the Ugly Duckling. And there's the very specific reason why we wanted that story to sort of be at the heart of what we were trying to say was not just this idea of someone who felt bullied and rejected and then turned out to be, you know, this beautiful swan, but one of the ways that fairy tale is completely different from any other is that the ugly duckling doesn't have to change anything about himself. He just has to grow into himself, right? Which is beautiful. He doesn't have to pass a test or slay a dragon. All he needs to do is just grow up and become himself. And I think that any story where we can share how we have found the way back to ourselves is super powerful. Most people most people's stories aren't as extreme as losing everything, sleeping on someone's sofa, and then being a millionaire the next day. Just really, I need to find out how that person did that in one day, though. But I think it is especially in the stories that are maybe less extreme that we can create that connection, because most of us go through the motions of life in a much less extreme way than we think is story worthy.
Yeah, I love that. But and I guess that comes back to your idea of having those authentic connections, that you share your real subtle story, and that's what people connect with and can relate to, because they're like, yeah, I get that. I struggled with that, and they found this path. Oh, that's interesting. And I love that ugly duckling story. And I recently learned about the hero's journey, where you have the guy and he is forced out of his village. He goes on a journey. Someone teaches him something, and he comes back and saves the world. But what I learned recently was about the heroine's journey. So she leaves the village, usually because she thinks she's not worthy. And then she finds a guide, or sometimes, but what she discovers, she isn't given any new skills. She just learns to believe in herself. And so I love that idea and it's the same with the ugly duckling. He didn't need to change anything, just believe in himself and grow into
Yeah,
who he was really meant to be. So I love that idea of finding the story in that just personal growth.
yeah.
Mm.
And I mean, obviously some of the stories are a bit more some of the stories that I'm sharing and that people are writing for me, or for me, not for me. for, well, they're writing it for me. No, some of the stories that are being contributed to the co-authored books are some of them are quite extreme, and some of them are really subtle and very, very small. But sometimes those smaller stories are just they're so lovely. I just really like those stories where people have this sort of quiet revolution within themselves, right? Where they suddenly find something that works for them, or they suddenly realize that what was like this a missing ingredient, or or like you say, like, and most of it is suddenly they believe in themselves, suddenly they find something that helps them believe in themselves. Yeah, it's, those are the powerful stories, because otherwise, if stories always have to be extreme, then we miss out on so much beauty in storytelling. Even, I'm not in the mood every day to watch a blockbuster movie. Sometimes I want something that's small and quiet, and it's the same with the stories that people want to read, and the people that they connect with. We don't always want the really big stories, and I sometimes also um yeah, I sometimes also question the stories that seem too extreme. I'm like, I think maybe there's a couple of steps that you've skipped over in this story, or a couple of insights that maybe haven't quite made it, either didn't make it into the story or haven't quite made it into your life story, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us about the Feminist Entrepreneur magazine. Where did that come from?
Um, so yeah, it really was a few things that started to come together for me. I wanted to create a platform where clearly people could share their stories. Everything we do, aside from the magazine, we do co-authored books, but both of those are really about, you know, a group of people coming together, co-creating something, and then collaboratively promoting it, so that everybody gets access to each other's audiences as well as their own. And so with the magazine, I really wanted to give voice to people who maybe don't always get that opportunity. um, I really, yeah, I really struggle with this hustle culture thing that is so, that we're just being inundated with. If you're in, like, I'm sure I'm not the only person, but it's so, as soon as Facebook, let's say Facebook, but any social media platform really, knows that you're in business, it's all this get up at 4 a.m. and start working and hustle grind, and I'm just thinking, this is not, that's not who I am. That's not how I can run a business. First of all, I'm not a morning person, so getting up at 4 a.m. is never going to happen. Um, but um, but also, I think this fascination we have with productivity and efficiency, and I think what we're missing in business is collaboration and intuition, and like all these sort of what are more feminine qualities, right? If we're looking at sort of the energy of the world, like we have these rational, productive, efficient, masculine qualities, and then the community, collaboration, creativity, intuition. And I think that we need a little bit of both. I'm not saying that productivity is a bad thing, not at all. And I, you know, I have weeks where I'm really, you know, making the hours and putting in the work. But I think if we first can connect to who we are as a human being and get that inspiration, and then we go to action, that works much better. So all of these thoughts that, and all these opinions that I have, I wanted to put them somewhere. And so I created the magazine, which is really a place where, you know, I do these lovely interviews with amazing people, who are just doing their thing and putting themselves out there in the world. And it's such a nice way. I mean, you were featured in the July issue this year, and it's such a nice way to kind of get a little glimpse at who a person is, and some of the opinions they hold around certain topics. There's usually a sort of overarching topic that we're looking at, and they're all, so, you know, we've done diversity and inclusivity in business. The July number, we looked at burnout and how to not burn out mostly. You know, the August edition, we're going to be looking at happiness and how does our business contribute to our happiness? What does happiness even mean to us? And I think so many of us get into business because we want to create a happier life, and then we're in business and we completely forget to look at whether our life is happier already.
Yeah. We had a great show, great episode on the show with Aurelie Linsky, who is, her business is Happitude at Work. And so we
Yes.
were talking all about happitude, but also that it's okay not to be happy too.
Yes,
It's
exactly. Yeah, and sometimes also, and again, it's often the smaller things that can create so much happiness.
Yeah.
And we're only waiting for the big things, because those are the, we're so trained to have, you know all these goals and smart goals and all this sort of these milestones that we have to be in our business. And there's a space for that, but there's also space to sometimes just kind of experiment a little bit. And to be quite honest, the magazine kind of came out of an experiment. But what I think makes it very different from other sort of um, online, it is an electronic magazine, um, but I really, from the get-go, said I don't want it to be just another blog that people have to read or could potentially read. So I made the very conscious decision to actually format it as a magazine. And although we're sending it out electronically because trees, um, but it still feels like you're reading a magazine, like you're leafing through a magazine. And I always say, like, get your cup of tea and just open it on a tablet or something so you can sit on the sofa and just enjoy reading a magazine and getting to know these amazing people, that are just doing amazing things and trying to change the world. It's all about what are we trying to achieve here. And I think most of us are not in business solely to make money. Making money is definitely a good thing, but I think all of us have this vision of what we would like the world to be, and that's what we're sharing about. That's the inspiration that we need, and that's what makes us, like, again, feel connected to other people. And
Mm.
we said, when we're feeling challenged as entrepreneurs, feeling connected to other people and knowing that you're not the only person out there who's going through this or who's trying to change the world in a certain way, it just really helps. It's a little hug
Yeah. And
from the collective.
yeah, it's really a great magazine, and it really fills a gap because you pick up some women's magazines in the shops, and it's all about fashion and the home, and there's not that much about women in business, and particularly not enough. So to have a whole magazine dedicated to the realities of and tackling some of these big challenges, as you said, like how to be happy, how to not burn out, which is really front of mind for a lot of us. These are great topics, and I really loved your magazine. So congratulations on that. I'll
Thank
make
you.
sure that we put the link to that in the show notes underneath.
Yeah, and it's and we it's a free subscription, so it's just um I really I really wanted to create something, a place where people can just get that inspiration and feel free to share it with other people within their community as well. It's yeah, so many business magazines, and I have to say, even the business magazines that are even the ones that are targeted at women, I find still have a very masculine atmosphere to them. It's still, business suits and mm, and um I don't know, that's not something that I feel particularly connected to, right? I have never worn a business suit in my life, and I hope to keep it that way. Um, but there's so many of us that are doing our, that are creating our business, and we're not looking to be the next CEO of, a Fortune 500 company or whatever. We just want to run our business and make it profitable and be successful with it. And that's what we want to do. We want to see if we can help some people make their life better in one way or another.
Yes, amen to that.
Yeah, and I think, it's yeah, so the magazine's colorful, and it has, it has different people with different from, like, I'm very conscious to I mean, the fact that we did a specific edition around diversity and inclusivity is because I think it's so important that we're telling these stories and stories of people who have traditionally not been heard. And women are definitely part of that, but there's, so many marginalized groups that need to be heard. And there's also some men who have stories that we also need to tell and that we also need to share, because so if there are accidentally any men that are listening, it is the Feminist Entrepreneurs magazine, but you're definitely welcome. You're definitely welcome as part of the tribe. Exactly. I get that question a lot though from men. They don't want to step on anyone's toes, I guess. And these particular men. But yeah, there's stories to be told there as well, because let's face it, the patriarchy isn't working for very many of us, regardless of gender or but also, people. I was so glad that one of the people that I got to interview for the diversity issue is a disabled entrepreneur, and it's like we don't highlight these things enough. But of course, these things, of course, there's people who are disabled or who are struggling with health issues, who have decided to set up their own business, whether as a result of that, of that challenge, or just because they decided to set up a business and they happen to have a health challenge. And I just think it's good that we share these stories and say like, hey, this is also a side of entrepreneurship, and especially female entrepreneurship.
Yeah, there's a local entrepreneur here, and she's been really successful in the beauty space because she's in a wheelchair and she couldn't get a job in beauty. They were like, "No, disabled people don't belong in this space." And she's like, "What? Well, let me show you
Well,
that
that's
that's not
weird.
the case." Yeah. So she couldn't get a job. She was really clearly discriminated against, and started her own business, and she's been hugely successful. So yeah, it's always great to hear stories like that where it's like, yeah, and it's really inspiring, if she can really go against the industry norm and be successful, then we can all do that kind of
Exactly.
embrace that in inspiration as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, any story, and just as human beings, we've evolved to learn through stories and to share stories with. It's written into our DNA. So whenever you read a story, you'll take something from it. You'll take something from it. You'll learn something from it. And so, yeah, take in those stories and also share your own.
Yeah, absolutely. Mags, thank you so much. You've shared just so much value and inspiration and insights.
Thank you.
I've really loved our interview today. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you would like to share with the audience that perhaps we haven't touched on yet, or anything you'd particularly like to highlight that we maybe have talked about, but you think, actually, this is really important?
I think that anyone who's wanting to step out and start sharing their story, keep it close to yourself. Share your own experiences from your own perspective. um, we don't know how the other actors in our story have experienced um, the same uh, what am I trying to say?
Same incident, maybe.
Thank you. I was lost for a word there. Um, so keep it close to yourself, um, especially when you're first getting started, to kind of share these more personal things. Keep them to yourself for a little bit, and then maybe check in with them a couple of weeks later to see if you're still comfortable with them, with sharing them a little bit wider. And also, what sometimes helps, and I say this a lot to the people that I work with, build it up a little bit. The authors in the program, I always say, like, you first just sharing the story with yourself, and then with our editor, and then with the other authors, and then we start sharing it more publicly, right? So sometimes it also helps to just start by maybe sharing it with a couple of people in your network that you trust, and then and build it up a little bit. It vulnerability never really goes away, because you're putting yourself out there, you can kind of get a little bit more comfortable with it by just, but take it a little bit slowly. Your own mental health is important as well.
Yeah. Brilliant advice. Mags, thank you so much. So I'm going to put all of your contact details in the show notes underneath. But for anyone who's listening to this podcast on the go and can't access those right now, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Any of the social media platforms, I'm House of Hives. And probably the quickest I'll respond to is on LinkedIn, where I'm not House of Hives, but I'm just Mags Thomson. But that is definitely where I spend most of my social media time. Yeah, and if people want to have a chat to see if any of the programs are for them, just go to houseofhives.com and book in a call.
Fantastic. Great. Well, thanks again, Mags.
Thank you.